Hello, listeners. Today I have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Sarah Porter, who is an award winning Stanford educated psychologist who translates the latest social science into simple, high impact strategies that you can implement right away to increase your well being and happiness at work. She has some pretty incredible talks and trainings, such as the musts of trust, creating an effective feedback culture, saying no, maximizing motivation. And overall, we just talk about how to make a positive change in your day to day. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode as much as I did. Welcome to the Live for Yourself Revolution, where our mission is to highlight stories of intrapreneurs and entrepreneurs who are truly living for themselves. I'm your host, Dr. Benjamin Ritter, leadership and career coach focused on guiding you toward a career and life you can love. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you enjoy the show.
Yeah, I think everyone has a different posture toward work, job, and career,
Yeah.
and look at each of those a little bit differently. I do think that regardless of role, I really do think we are all motivated by a sense of kind of mastery or competence and some sort of connection. I think where we see the dial kind of move up or down, that's a little bit more specific to the individual, is around autonomy. You're really high on autonomy. I'm really high on autonomy. I bet a lot of people who listen to your podcast high on
Right, autonomy.
autonomy,
Yeah.
right? Because they're looking to kind of go out on their own. I don't know that everyone feels that degree of need for freedom, but I think all of us have a desire to feel good at what we do,
Yep.
feel recognized for what we do, and I think to feel like we're doing it for some greater good, whatever that may be, with people we like being around. I think that cuts across workplaces, industries, roles.
Yeah, you're throwing out a bunch of concepts. If you ever read So Good They Can't Ignore You by Cal Newport, where it
Mhm.
really is about just find the thing that you want to do it and fall in love with it because you're great at it.
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
the whatever model of job satisfaction you want to look at that talks about, challenge and growth and social relationships and meaning and
Always.
actual work. Yeah. Okay. So I'm probably
Okay.
going to put this in. We're probably in the podcast right now, listeners.
Okay.
Dr. Porter did not know that we were going to put this in. Hopefully she's okay with it.
Sure.
So, okay. We have in this lovely market, since we're talking about work right now, and that's kind of your specialty along with well being, 20 to 30% probably pay cuts right now from the top that we're seeing. We got layoffs, or at least headlines of layoffs, doom and gloom, and also like excitement about an economy. I think it's like kind of this like 50-50 split. And then you have RTO just slamming, like people getting called into the office, people
Mm,
feeling like there is no hope, they can't trust their employer, and if they put boundaries in relationship to work, they're going to lose their job.
mhm.
I don't know if you're seeing that, but I have like a different perspective because I get to work with clients that get to land jobs, so that's super cool. But I also talk to people that are currently in jobs that are really afraid. What are you noticing?
I think I'm noticing something similar. I am seeing people who are feeling afraid of what could happen, what might be, what is on the horizon, fact or fiction, right? And I think folks are feeling afraid to hope. And I know for me, what helps is to reframe hope in the way that we psychologists look at it, which gives you a lot more empowerment and ability to affect change. So when we say, like, oh, I hope it really works out, I hope I don't get laid off this quarter. That's very much the sense of like optimism or wishful thinking without any action or agency. And when I look at hope, I really do look at it. I like to say you need a high GPA to have hope. You want to have some really clear goals for yourself, and those can be personal or professional. But certainly when we're looking at the workplace, What are my goals? Am I wanting to maintain and keep this job? Am I wanting to upskill in particular ways? Am I wanting to get promoted or find an even better opportunity within or outside my company? And then I look at our sense of agency, which is that sense of self-efficacy. I call it our I think I can little engine that could in us. This sense of like, I can affect some change for myself. There are things I can do. There are strengths I can bring to bear to move toward those goals. And then the P are our pathways. And this is where about half of us fall apart when it comes to feeling hopeful because we come up with one path. We're like, all right, I want that promotion. I know that I bring really good strategic thinking. I'm a great relationship builder. So I am going to give this big presentation and pitch to my boss and see how it goes. And when that gets kicked down the line, they don't get to meet with them, or it kind of lands with a thud, they're left feeling hopeless. Why? They only came up with one pathway. And so the kind of secret sauce of hope is coming up with multiple pathways to get where you want to go. So that way, when you hit a roadblock, because you will, you can move to plan B, plan C, or plan D. And what we know is folks who can build this sort of high GPA or this hope building muscle are much happier when you talk about workplace well-being. We are happier, about 10% happier than our peers. We're significantly more productive. We're talking we can get as much done in 4 days of the week that it takes our colleagues who are lower hope 5 days. And so this can really be the linchpin for helping you feel more invigorated going into a new year, going into an uncertain future. So to me, hope helps whether you're a job seeker, you can apply these same concepts, or you're currently in a role with an unknown future. Use this hope, create a hope map of your own, build that GPA.
I'm just envisioning this like Plinko machine. I think
I
that's what they're
love
called.
Plinko. Yes. The Price is Right style Plinko
Yeah, I
machine.
just so like
Uh-huh.
I can't see all the branches after I drop the little disc, but I know that I'm trying to get to a certain place.
Yeah.
And like personally, I've had to develop over the years. Like I don't care what happens to the disc when it's falling because I got a bunch of other discs and I got a bunch of other paths that I can take.
That's
I
exactly
know
right.
where I want to go and I know where I'm starting. Everything else in between is just like the journey and progress and learning and
Yeah,
opportunity.
yeah.
Is
And
this?
you oh,
Oh
go
yeah,
ahead.
please go on. No, go.
Oh, I was gonna say, and I think at the same time, I don't want people to feel like, "Oh my gosh, does that mean that I have to just quickly pivot to my next pathway and not feel sad or upset or disappointed or angry if I hit a roadblock?" And my answer is, no, you can feel all those things. The key aspect of this that we know is the ability to respond to that setback in a way we know works better than what most of us do. So what most of us do when we hit a roadblock is we get really critical. And most of the time, that criticism, we direct it toward ourselves. Like, I fell short. I failed in this way. Why did I not think this through? Why did I not anticipate that? And it's interesting. We think that being really tough on ourselves is motivating. We think that we need to give ourselves that tough talk to get moving. Interestingly, you really wanna respond when you hit that roadblock with what we call self-compassion, which is basically just talk to yourself the way you would talk to your favorite friend if they were to tell you they hit a roadblock. Most of us are not beating them up verbally. We're like, "Hey, man, I get it. It's rough. You couldn't have known all of this was coming." And there's been over 4,000 studies that show when we give ourselves self-compassion rather than that self-criticism, we are quicker to get back on our goal train. We can access those as other pathways more readily. We don't procrastinate as much. And frankly, we just feel better physically and mentally. It's like a game changer in all the ways. So I would kind of tack that on when you're developing your hope chart, so to speak, that you also watch how you respond in the moments when you hit a red light and make sure you're treating yourself the way you would a dear friend, a loved one.
Hmm.
About 85% of us are way harder on ourselves than anyone else.
Oh yeah, that inner
Yeah.
critic is just it's like just sitting in our heads. You think that it would be our best friend, it's like that's how close we are to him.
And we think it helps, but I can tell you the research is pretty unequivocal that that trash talking inner critic, not that helpful. It actually slows us down. It takes us longer to get back on the horse, and
Hmm.
it makes us feel crappy while we're waiting it out.
Yeah, the only time you should be hard on yourself is maybe like in a workout. I don't know. No, probably
Yeah.
still use self-compassion.
I still think self-compassion would
Yeah.
help. There's even interesting research out there in like the behavioral health and physical health realm around like reducing your use of alcohol and cigarettes. They literally find that people can cut back more easily when they talk to themselves with self-compassion, not
Hmm.
self-criticism.
Hmm.
So I think this would probably even carry to the gym.
Love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, generally when I'm working with leaders, the statement always comes out that you have to treat yourself like the leader you wished you had. And how are you leading yourself forward? How are you supporting your goals? How are you creating hope for yourself? Is
Exactly.
is the hope mantra? And I might probably the answer is it depends, but you can see someone having a goal of like I want to learn X skill, or I want to get promoted, or I want to work in XYZ title, or whatever that goal is. That could be very independent of someone's current job. So, are we generally talking about it within the confines of an organization, or are we talking about it? Okay,
No,
could
I
be
mean, I
broader.
think this is pretty universally applicable. So it doesn't have to be within the constraints of your current position. It could truly be what are the pathways that I can start to build out and walk down to get me out of this job, to pivot industries, to get that promotion, to get that training I've been craving or that certification I've been wanting for years. It doesn't have to be specific to where you are right now in this particular company and position.
Well, you've already given our audience some incredible tips around self efficacy and self compassion and how to really create hope. And
Mhm.
I know we'll get to more, but I want to hear more about you and your story. Like, how did you get to this point? Like,
Yeah.
what happened to you?
I am what some people have called a hope hustler. So that may or may not be one of my nicknames. So, I am a counseling psychologist by training. And so I have really come from the world of being a therapist. And I love sitting with a person one on one and helping them figure out what is getting in the way of them living the life they imagined, right? What are the blocks? What are the relationship dynamics? I love that work. It's a real privilege for people to be so vulnerable with me and kind of allow me to join with them, witness them, and ask questions to help them get where they want to go. And I'm deeply pragmatic and I wanted to scale what I do. And so, as much as I love my one on one work, I wanted to be able to reach more people more quickly and I wanted to be able to tackle some of the systems that bring people into therapy. I'm also a professor. I teach college students. I wanted to tackle the systems that bring people to the college to retrain and embark on a new career because the one they were in just wasn't working. And so for me, I thought, I really want to take all that I know from the social sciences and translate it for the workplace because we psychologists are great at conducting studies, putting together pretty amazing research. We're not so great at sharing that information outside of ourselves. So we're great at telling fellow psychologists about the outcomes. We're not so great at communicating that to people beyond the confines of academia. And because I'm a very nerdy, well-trained quantitative researcher by education, but I'm also a extrovert. I do have that dash of nerd and I'm very practical. I can actually take it, read and digest and synthesize the research and turn it into super easy strategies that you can use immediately to make yourself a better leader, to make your day-to-day work more joyful. And so I took what I know And I actually had some time at the height of the pandemic to build this kind of side project because I was not traveling the way I'd traveled before. I wasn't socializing the way I was early on. And I'd had this little germ of an idea, this little, start of an idea, and began really building it out. And I ended up kind of carrying this as a side hustle for a couple of years before I reached a point where I could not hold on to my full-time faculty position and do the side business around the margins. And so I made the leap. And Ben, you and I have talked before about how much both of us really like autonomy, and I really like being creative. I love being able to affect systems change. And I really enjoy kind of getting to know people and helping people at a scaled level. And so I thought to myself, let's do this. I felt like, given the constraints of my work, I felt a little bit like a bird with her wings clipped and I wanted to fly. And so I leaped into this full time. And for the last, gosh, 3 or 4 years, I have been working with companies large and small. So we're talking really scrappy startups and some Fortune 100 financial firms. And I come in and I deliver keynotes, but I actually really love doing workshops where I help kind of build people's skills around their emotional intelligence, how to build trust, how to build hope, how to be more effective leaders, whether that's a leader with or without the title behind it. And so this is the work I do all over the country, and it is so much fun. I feel like I'm certainly a role model for doing what you love, and people often say they can feel it because I just enjoy what I do so much.
How beautiful of a story. I know there's so much more probably underlying than I'm going to be able to get to right now, but do you remember the defining moment, the kind of spark that lit the fire right now that led to workplace kind of well-being?
It's funny, I do. So when I think back, I always used to tell clients that when you look at your history, it may not make sense moment to moment, but in hindsight, you can connect the dots. And the same thing happened for me. So I've always had this interest in how our career affects and shapes our identity. This dates back to high school. And so I've always had that interest. And so I actually ran a career center at a college in the San Francisco Bay Area back in the day. And then I went off to graduate school. I did actually a lot of work on career development and its effect on our mental health and well being. And then I went out and started working doing mental health treatment. And I always had an ear for career. So that's been a through line that's been constant. I also was a bit of a ham, and so I'd often be asked to be kind of the public facing person for a group of therapists who are not always known for being the folks who like to go out and talk to the world. They much rather sit in their office and talk one on one, generally speaking. And so I was kind of like the public face and I loved it. And what happened is I was reading a journal article. This is my pivot point because this is what I do for fun. And I read this really cool article about how gratitude can be used as a retention tool. And in this case, they were looking at college student retention, but I was like, the same thing would work in the workplace. And that really launched this idea of what else can we take that I know from my work as a therapist and from my consuming research that could really help us in our workplace and kind of bring together my love of speaking and training and educating, my social science expertise, and that real ongoing passion and commitment to career and bring them all together. So it was reading that article that kind of helped things fall into place. And I ended up taking a sabbatical from my professor position to do a research project where I developed a curriculum based on psychology practices to help retain college students. And it was great. It totally scratched the itch. It was almost like a pilot for what I ended up doing for our workforce. And so that was really the turning point for me. I didn't fully understand that that was the big turning point
Yeah.
in the moment. I had a feeling, but truly looking back, I'm like, "Oh, yeah, that was it."
Was there something that you knew wasn't the best fit from what you were currently doing, or was it more so that you were following just interests and passions and curious, or was it
I
something else
am
all entirely?
I'm a believer in wherever possible, moving towards something you're excited about rather than trying to get away from something you don't like. Because I've
Hmm.
seen people make a lot of moves out of just panic or just absolute frustration, and they end up in a spot that's not much better, if at all, and sometimes even
Yeah.
worse. So I like to move toward what excites me rather than away from what doesn't. And so I made this move because it like lit a new spark under me. I saw how much energy I had for it. I think the other piece for me is I redefined what creativity meant to me. I think I'd always, and it's funny, I talk about this with folks a lot. We often think creativity is coming up with a brand spanking new idea, something no one's ever heard of, thought of, considered. And I realized, wait a second, there's a whole swath of creativity that's actually just what we call creative collisions. It's the ability to take like two disparate ideas that are already out there and smashing them together in a cool new way. And I'm like, oh, I am not that first person, but I am definitely that second person. And I want to lean into this and do more of this. Right. And so I think reframing and understanding better what creativity is gave me some of the fuel to make the move. I think that was a big piece of it. So I wasn't retreating away or running away, but I was truly moving toward. And I did know, given just the constraints of my work, there weren't going to be opportunities to create programs the way I do now. And so I was like, let me just go for it. The other thing is, I'm a big believer in there's actually a concept from what we call acceptance and commitment therapy called values guided action. There's lots of versions of this out there, but basically, figure out what your values are and then use them as a filter for making your decisions. And one of my big values is growth. And I was feeling like I'd been in my role for a long time. I'd maxed out a lot of the opportunities that were in that role. And I wanted to take values guided action and grow even more. And so I think combined, that's why I ended up making the leap when I did.
How great of a story. How beautiful. I love how you said too that you never really know what you're doing until like you kind of get to the end point, which isn't really the end point. And I mean, you know what you're doing, you're being intentional, but just in terms of
Yeah.
how everything's going to come together in the end. Like
Yeah.
I had no idea that all of my interests were going to lead me to this point today. Like you could take anything I was doing at any random time and be like, it makes no sense. He was a nutritionist, and then he was in health policy, and then he was in healthcare, and then I guess he was a soccer player. Like, how did he end up where he is today?
And now you can tell that story. You look back and
Hmm.
you're like, I can tell a narrative that's rich and complex and actually captures who I am. And so, yeah, we make an intentional choice with each step. We don't always see the full picture until we pause and look back. And I do recommend people pause and reflect as a life practice, and certainly as a career practice, because I think that's when you have those light bulbs go off of like, oh, I didn't fully realize this coming full circle. Or, ooh, I'm missing a couple of critical pieces. I need to make some adjustments or pivots. So I would say pause and reflect periodically. I mean, if you want to put a number on it, maybe twice a year,
Yeah.
do that.
You have just kind of said, yeah, I just took a sabbatical. Or like, I knew I wasn't going to have time, and so I just said no to that. Like, I know a lot of people that might know what they want to do, but are afraid of doing it. I'd love to hear about how you motivated yourself or just advice for our audience on how to maybe have those boundaries or be a little bit more fearless.
Yeah. So I'll tell you, I was in a unique position that when you're working in faculty, and to be clear, I was what we call a counseling faculty member. So I was literally a therapist, but with faculty appointment. And then I did do some teaching on the side. But because of that faculty appointment, The beautiful thing about academia is you can apply for and get a sabbatical. And very few people had done it in my counseling world. I think just because it hadn't been done, folks hadn't really thought about it or considered it too much. But for me, I was like, you know what? I need to put a pause on what I'm doing. I know how to do what I do pretty well, like in my sleep. And so I need to say no to some kind of day to day opportunities to open myself up to that sabbatical. And so I really did kind of use that filter of that values guided action and reflect, what do I want out of the next year, the next 2 years? And saying yes or no to this request, is that gonna move me closer, like, toward or away from what I want? And for me, I was like, I need to put aside, teaching for the semester, even though I love teaching. I need to put aside saying yes to that committee or that initiative because I know I need to explore this work I want to do, this idea I have. And so I need to sacrifice these cool, smaller opportunities, kind of lowercase opportunities for this capital letter O opportunity of taking a sabbatical. And so I had to say no. And the beauty of saying no, it does not come easily to me, is the more you do it, like many things, the more you do it, the easier it becomes. I actually teach people now how to say no and how to do it in a way that is tactful and can actually deepen your relationships rather than fracture them.
Is that the cliffhanger, or are we gonna get like an abbreviated version of that?
You want to hear? Okay, I don't know. So, yeah, I mean, what I think about is there's a number of different ways that you can say no. So, and they range in flexibility. What I can tell you is the super direct, just like, no, not going to do it. That no is a complete sentence. Doesn't always work great with an existing team. It can kind of cost you some relational points. That being said, there's some more kind of flexible and collegial ways to say no that elicit empathy, that allow people to feel understood, and that convey that you're engaged, you're enthusiastic, you want to help, and you can't right now. And so I teach a bunch of different ways to do it. A couple of my faves are to literally say, like, a classic, like, I know it's disappointing and I'm not going to be able to help you this time. Using the word "and" instead of "but," which is what we'd normally say. I know you're disappointed, but I can't do it. The "but" negates what came before it. The "and" allows both to be true. And so the recipient feels it better. They feel better about what you're saying, even when you're declining. I teach people about what I call the negotiated no, where sometimes we think it's all or nothing. So if someone asks us to help them create a learning module or a hiring manual, you're like, oh gosh, I do not have the bandwidth to do that. I have to say no. Well, there may be somewhere between I have to do the whole thing and I'm going to do nothing. And so I do negotiated no's, like, I won't be able to help you create the hiring manual. What I can do is offer you a couple of resources that helped me when I made mine. And often people are thrilled with that. That's all they really needed or wanted. And then the other one is when there's a legitimately good opportunity that you really hate to say no to, but you know that if you say yes, you're going to be overstretched. You may not deliver as well. I call it the boomerang. You say, gosh, this is painful to decline because it's so up my alley and I really can't take it on right now. Please come back to me with the next opportunity. My calendar is going to clear up at the end of the quarter. So just only say that though if you're ready for them to come back. Don't say that if you don't really want them to circle back because you know they will. And so I teach people those no strategies because we often just don't have the language. And then I also teach people some questions to consider around, of course, does this align with my goals and priorities? Do I have the bandwidth, just energy and time wise? We're notorious underestimators. And so we think we do. You always want to pad whatever estimate you have by about 20% to correct for our tendency to think we can do more than we can. And then if you're the right, am I the right person to do this? And if you're like, I'm not, make a referral to the right person. And if you are the right person, you do have the bandwidth, it does align with your goals. Think about, are there ways I can basically set some limits around this? So, can I ask for more time? Can I ask for a collaborator? something like that to make the lift not so heavy. So those are some of the things I teach people, and there's quite a bit of social science behind that, including using words like won't. I won't be able to help you actually reduces the likelihood of people trying to say, I think you can, let me troubleshoot with you. If you say, I can't help you, they're more likely to be like, are you sure? And push back than if you say won't. So I teach little tricks like that too.
I want to go try some of these.
I know.
Yeah. Now, I was thinking about different languages that I know, and like no is like, I don't know if there's other versions of no. Like, I need to learn a language where there's a different no in that language, a different word for no.
You know what? It's interesting. There's quite a bit of cross-cultural research around boundary setting and saying no.
Hmm.
And I think it's in Japan. The phrase they use basically means like, that's interesting.
Ah, okay.
And when you say that's interesting, it's code for, I'm not going to do it, but that's interesting.
Yeah.
So I think there absolutely are some cultural variations on no that convey the same meaning or follow up action or lack thereof, but don't use no.
Hmm. I'm gonna call out some of my coworkers now in the future, some of my friends. So you are such
That's
an
so
expert.
interesting, Ben.
Yeah. Is that why you said that's interesting when I asked if you wanted to come on the podcast?
What an
What?
interesting opportunity.
This has been such a treat, and I know you've given so much value to our audience. How could they learn more about you, maybe even bring you into their company?
Yeah. So you can find me on my website. My website is Dr. Sarah Porter, and it's Sarah Porter.com. And then you can also find me on LinkedIn, Sarah Porter, PhD. And then occasionally, if you're into Instagram, you can see me there at Dr. Sarah Porter. So any of those three are great avenues for connecting with me and talking about some opportunities to partner.
Wonderful. Well, all listeners, go check out Dr. Sarah Porter's links. They'll be in the show notes. And Dr. Sarah Porter, thank you so much for your time. I've learned how to have hope. I learned how to say no. And I'm going to have a little bit of self compassion for myself this evening.
Ooh, I like it. That's a trifecta of well-being right there. Thank you, Ben, for having me. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
You've been part of the Live for Yourself revolution. If you've enjoyed today's episode, make sure to share with a friend and spread the good word. Until next time, keep on living for yourself.